The hand came down like a hammer. Gideon Shelby had barely reached across the tavern table to pull the map toward him when a green hand, broad-palmed and iron-fingered, slammed flat over his wrist and pinned it to the scarred wood with a force that rattled the clay cups and silenced the three men sitting beside him. He looked up. The woman standing over him was not small, and she was not gentle, and she was looking at him like he had done something that required a reckoning. "That map," she said, low and deliberate, "belongs to me." The tavern at the base of Keithra's wall was called the Broken Tine, and it smelled like pine resin and old ale, and the particular kind of desperation that clings to men who have run out of other options. It was a rough, low-ceilinged room with oil lanterns guttering against the mountain wind that pressed through every crack in the timber walls, and it was half full of cell swords, porters, off-duty wall guards, and a handful of traders trying to survive the first bad week of what everyone was calling an early winter. Gideon was a wall guard, 24 years old, with corporal's stripes he had stitched onto his own jacket because the garrison quartermaster had run out of official patches. He had found the map under a dead courier 3 hours ago on the Eastern Road, had been trying to decipher it ever since, and had not yet worked out that the woman who had drawn it was still alive. He looked at the hand on his wrist. Then he looked at her face. She was tall enough that she had to tilt her head slightly under the lowest of the ceiling beams. Her skin was the deep, muted green of old pine needles, and her eyes were a shade of amber that caught the lamplight and held it the way honey holds the sun. Her tusks were modest by orc standards, curving up cleanly from her lower jaw just past the line of her lips, and her dark hair was pulled back in a tight braid that had come half loose and fell in dark ropes against her neck. She wore a fitted leather bodice that laced up the front over a close-cut linen shirt the color of undyed wool, snug travel leathers that tucked into knee-high boots, and a short, hooded riding cloak the color of pine bark thrown back over one shoulder. A short-bladed hunting knife rode at her left hip. She was, in any objective assessment, the most striking person in the Broken Tine, and she was gripping his wrist hard enough that he could feel his pulse throb against her palm. "The courier is dead," Gideon said, keeping his voice even. "I found him on the eastern switchback 3 hours ago. I brought his satchel in because there may be dispatches inside that the garrison captain needs to—" "I am not interested in the dispatches," she said. "I am interested in that map. I drew it. It is the only copy." "Give it to me." One of the men beside Gideon, a broad-shouldered Gates sergeant named Aldrich who had 17 years on the wall and the manners of a timber wolf, leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. "Watch yourself, orc. You are in a human town. We do not take kindly to—" "Aldrich," Gideon said quietly. "I am just saying Aldrich." The word was flat and simple and carried the particular weight that Gideon used when he needed something to stop. Aldrich stopped. Gideon turned back to the woman. "What is your name?" She studied him for a moment. He could feel her grip on his wrist shift slightly, not loosening but adjusting like she was taking the measure of him. "Ghorza," she said. "Ghorza Gorehorn." "Ghorza." He repeated it carefully, the way he did with every unfamiliar word, wanting to get it right. "I am Gideon Shelby, corporal of the Keithra Wall East Garrison. I do not want your map. I want to understand what is on it, because the courier who was carrying it was killed by something I have never seen before on this road, and I think it might be relevant to the 83 people currently living inside this town." Something moved through her expression. Not softening exactly, but a reordering, like she was setting aside one calculation and picking up another. "How was he killed?" she asked. 3 separate claw marks deep across the back, spaced like a hand but wider. Whatever made them was larger than a bear, maybe 2 of them working together. He paused. "I have been on this wall for 5 years and I have never seen that track before." Ghorza was quiet for a moment. Then she looked down at her hand on his wrist, and Gideon watched something flicker across her face, a small, quick thing, like she had only just noticed that she was still holding on. She did not let go immediately. She looked at her own hand as if it were making a decision without her, and then she looked back at his face, and the silence between them was charged with something that neither of them had planned for. Then she let go and straightened and pulled the stool across from him out with her boot and sat down. "The claw marks," she said. "Were they parallel or converging?" "Parallel," he said. "All three perfectly so, like something raked down without any lateral drag." She nodded slowly, and for the first time something that was not suspicion moved through her amber eyes. It was recognition, and it was not a comfortable one. "It is called a ridge stalker," she said. "We do not have a common tongue name for them. They are creatures of the deep alpine rock, not mountain wolves, not bears, something older and more patient. They move in mated pairs. They do not usually come below the snowline." "The snowline has been dropping," Gideon said. "Yes," she said, "that is the problem." Aldrich pushed back from the table and walked away without a word. The other two guards followed. Gideon did not stop them. He was looking at Ghorza Gorehorn, and he was thinking about the map, and he was thinking about the thing that had killed the courier, and somewhere underneath all of that, in a place he did not have a name for yet, he was still thinking about her hand on his wrist, and the way she had looked at it when she finally noticed. "Show me the map," she said. "I will explain what it means." He flattened it between them on the table. It was a detailed rendering of the mountain above Kithra's wall, drawn in ink on oiled parchment with a precision that spoke of long hours and considerable skill. There were contour lines suggesting elevation, markings he did not recognize in what he assumed was the Orcish script, and a series of red marks that traced a path from somewhere above the snowline down through the eastern ravines to the wall itself. "Those red marks," he said. "Sighting points," she said. "Places where I observed the pair over the last 2 weeks. I was tracking them because they were moving lower each time the temperature dropped. I was bringing this to your garrison captain because one of our clan scouts saw them take a mountain elk 3 days ago at the same elevation as the eastern road." She paused. "I was too late." "You were trying to warn us," Gideon said. "I was trying to prevent exactly what happened to your courier." Her voice carried no particular emotion, but it was not cold either. It was the voice of someone who had spent years learning to say difficult things clearly. "Your people and mine do not have a history of easy cooperation. I was not certain I would be believed." He looked at her. "I believe you," he said. She held his gaze for a long moment. "You do not know me," she said. "You have no reason to." "I know what those claw marks look like," he said. "And I know you have been sitting in the cold, tracking something dangerous for 2 weeks to try to warn people who might throw you out of their town for the effort. That tells me enough." The lamplight moved across her face. Outside, the mountain wind pushed harder against the timbers, and somewhere high above them, beyond the stone wall and the switchback road and the darkening snowfields, something moved in the deep cold of the alpine rock. "How many people in this town cannot move quickly?" she asked. 47, he said without hesitation because he had counted. "Elderly, injured, or too young." "Then we have a problem," she said, "because if both members of the pair are below the snowline, they will reach the wall perimeter before dawn." Gideon stood up. He went to the barkeep, left coin for 2 bowls of the thick mountain stew that was simmering on the hearth, came back, set one in front of Ghorza without asking, and began pulling on his jacket. "I need to speak to the garrison captain," he said. "Then I need to get back out on the eastern road with a full lantern and a better weapon than this short sword. Will you come?" She looked at the stew. She looked at him. Then she picked up the spoon. "Let me eat first," she said. "I have not eaten since yesterday morning." He sat back down. He watched her eat with the direct, unfussy efficiency of someone who had spent most of her life outdoors, and he found himself noticing things he had no particular reason to notice. The way she held the spoon, the line of her jaw, the place where the braid was coming loose, and a dark wave of hair lay against the curve of her neck. He looked away when she caught him looking, and she did not comment on it, but he thought from the very slight shift in the corner of her mouth that she had filed it away. "You are not what I expected," she said after a moment. "What did you expect?" "Aldrich," she said simply. He almost smiled. "Aldrich has his virtues." "Name one." "He always shows up," Gideon said. Whatever else he is, he always shows up when the trouble is real. She considered that and nodded with the careful fairness of someone who believes in accuracy. Then he and I have one thing in common, she said. They left the broken tine 20 minutes later, stepping out into a cold that hit like a door swung open to an empty room. The mountain rose above the wall in the darkness, a mass of stone and snow catching the blue-white light of a cloud-covered moon, and the wind had teeth in it now, not the playful bite of an early autumn chill, but the genuine, measured malice of an alpine winter arriving ahead of schedule. Garrison Captain Maren Thrake was a compact, gray-haired woman of 50 with the air of someone who had stopped being surprised by things about a decade ago, and she listened to Gideon's account of the courier, and then to Ghorza's explanation of the ridge stalkers with her hands folded on the table and her expression professionally neutral. When they were finished, she said, "How do we kill them?" "Deep blade or heavy bolt to the base of the skull," Ghorza said. "The flanks are armored with compressed hide. Front legs are the weak point if you want a slow one, but slowing is not the same as killing. They are fast and they hunt cooperatively. One drives from the front and the other flanks. Do not let them separate your group." "What are they afraid of?" Thrake asked. "Light," Ghorza said. "Real light, not lanterns. A good bonfire stops them cold. They are cave creatures at their origin. Bright open fire disrupts them. They will not cross a fire line." Thrake looked at Gideon. "Get every man on the wall, double the eastern lookouts. Light the signal fires on posts 3 and 5. She looked at Ghorza. What are you asking for?" "Nothing," Ghorza said. "I am not asking for anything." "I came to warn you." Thrake studied her for a long moment. "You are Gorehorn clan from the upper reaches." "I was," Ghorza said. "I travel alone now." "Then you are under my protection tonight," Thrake said. "Anyone who gives you trouble answers to me." She stood. "Shelby, she is with you. Keep her close, keep her useful, and do not let Aldrich be a fool about it." Gideon said, "Yes, Captain." They went out into the cold night together. The eastern wall of Kithra ran along the edge of the mountain's first great step, a shelf of rock where the town clung like a barnacle, and the wall walk gave a clear view of the switchback road below and the ravine slopes that flanked it. Gideon brought Ghorza up to post 3 and they stood together in the cold wind, looking out over the darkness, and after a moment he unslung the long coat from the pack he had brought up and offered it to her without comment. She looked at it. "I am not cold," she said. "You have not eaten since yesterday," he said. "You have been out in this for 2 weeks. Take the coat." She took it. She did not say thank you, but she pulled it on and the sleeves were too short and it did not quite close across her shoulders, and she looked, in the oversized coat with her dark braid loose around her face, briefly and entirely unexpectedly young. He looked away before she could catch him. "Tell me about the ridge stalkers," he said. "Everything you know," she told him. She had a good mind for it, organized and specific, the way a person gets when they have spent years learning things that other people's lives depend on knowing. The ridge stalkers moved in established pair bonds, she explained. They were territorial over vast ranges but would abandon range for prey if the prey was sufficiently concentrated. They communicated in subsonic vibrations, that their prey could sometimes feel as unease or vertigo before the attack. They did not like fire, she had already said that, but they also did not like the smell of pine resin burning, which was why the Kithra town stank of it even in summer, though nobody here knew that was the reason. "The monastery walls," he said suddenly. She turned to look at him. "The inner monastery," he said. "The old one at the center of town. The walls are older than the garrison walls by 300 years. There are carvings on the foundation stones. I have always thought they were religious markings, but some of them could be warning marks," she said. "Yes, your monastery was built on a site that was already known to have ridge stalker territory above it. Someone 300 years ago knew what was up there." She paused. "Someone like my ancestors." "Your ancestors were here before the monastery," he said. It was not a question. "My ancestors were everywhere before the monasteries," she said, without bitterness but without softness either. "That is simply true." He accepted that the way he accepted accurate things. "I am sorry," he said, "for what it is worth." She looked at him sideways. "That is not worth much in the practical sense," she said. "But it is unusual enough that I note it. They heard it before they saw anything." A low tremor in the stone beneath their boots, barely there, like a cart passing on cobblestones far below, except there were no carts on the roads at this hour. Ghorza straightened immediately and put her hand flat on the parapet stone, feeling. "Both of them," she said. "They are close." Then the fire on post 5 went out. Not guttered, not blown out by wind. Went out instantly, between one breath and the next, as if something large had simply walked through it. Gideon had the wall horn in his hand, and sounded it before he had consciously decided to. 3 long blasts, the signal for contact on the eastern approach. The garrison responded with the trained precision of 5 years of Thrake's drilling. Torches lit on the wall walk. The heavy iron fire bowls at the base of the gate towers caught and blazed up. Men took positions. Aldrich materialized out of the darkness to Gideon's left with a crossbow already loaded. What came up out of the ravine was not what Gideon's mind had been constructing. He had imagined something like a great wolf or a mountain lion, big and fast and terrible, but still within the category of animal his experience could process. What came up was neither of those things. It was low to the ground but massive, broader across the shoulder than a draft horse, moving on 6 limbs with a rolling, unhurried gait that suggested it had never in its existence needed to hurry for anything. Its hide was the color of the mountain granite, dark and slightly ridged, and its head was broad and flat with eyes that caught no light at all, not even a reflection, like holes cut in the darkness. The second one came from the left, from the place where there was no road, from the sheer face of the ravine wall, moving up the stone with its 6 limbs finding holds that did not appear to exist. "Fire," Ghorza said, and her voice was completely steady. "Bowl at the base of the ravine path. Light it now." Gideon looked at the fire bowl, which was 30 yards below on the outside of the wall. "That bowl is outside the wall," he said. "I know," she said. "Someone needs to light it." There was a pause of approximately 2 seconds during which Gideon confirmed to himself that this was in fact what needed to happen, and then he was moving toward the gate stair with Ghorza a half-step behind him. Aldrich shouted something after them that was probably good advice. They went down anyway. The eastern gate was a heavy timber affair that could be barred from the inside, and getting it open and out took a frustrating 40 seconds, which they did not really have, because the second ridge stalker was on the ravine wall to their left, and moving with a deliberate, terrible patience that suggested it was waiting for someone to come out of the gate. Gideon came out first with the torch and felt, not heard but felt, a deep subsonic pressure in his sternum that was, he now understood, what the vertigo felt like from outside. His legs went briefly unreliable. Then Ghorza was beside him, and she grabbed his shoulder to steady him and said, "Keep moving. If you stop moving, you will not start again. Keep your eyes on the fire bowl and walk." He walked. He kept his eyes on the fire bowl and he walked, and she kept her hand on his shoulder, and they covered the 30 yards in what felt like an unreasonably long time, while the mountain pressed its dark silence around them, and the vertigo came in waves that he pushed through by looking at the fire bowl and thinking about the 47 people inside the wall who could not move quickly. He reached the bowl and drove the torch into the oil-soaked cedar kindling. The fire went up like a door opening onto the sun. The ridge stalker on the ravine wall screamed. There was no other word for it. A high tearing sound that seemed to come from inside the rock itself, and it pulled backward, all 6 limbs finding impossible purchase in reverse, and disappeared over the rim of the ravine. From the wall above, he could hear the second one making the same sound. Ghorza gripped his shoulder hard and said, "Now, back inside. They will come back when the fire drops." They ran. The gate guards got the heavy timber bar down behind them in time, and Gideon stood in the fire-lit interior of the wall with his hands on his knees catching his breath, and Ghorza stood beside him, perfectly still, watching the gate with those amber eyes steady and measuring. "That was either very brave or very stupid," Aldrich said, appearing out of the firelight. "Both," Ghorza said. Aldrich looked at her. He was not a man who gave ground easily, but something in the direct way she said it made him make a small sound that was, possibly, the beginning of something like respect. They held the wall through the night. The ridge stalkers returned twice and retreated both times from the fire. Gideon stood his rotation and then stood it again, and at some point in the deep cold hours before dawn Ghorza came to stand beside him at the eastern parapet with 2 cups of something hot that the cook had sent up, and they stood together with the cold pressing in from the mountain above them and the fire pushing back from below, and drank in silence for a while. "Where do you go when this is done?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Wherever the next thing is," she said. "You travel alone by choice," he said, "not by circumstance." She looked at him. "Is there a difference?" "Yes," he said, "there is." She wrapped both hands around her cup, and her expression was complicated in the way that the expressions of people who have been alone for a long time tend to be when someone says something too accurate. "I used to travel with my clan," she said. 2 years ago, the upper routes changed. A rock slide took the winter path. My clan went east to find new territory. I came south to scout the new mountain lay. I was meant to return in 3 months. She stopped. "And," he said. "And the eastern route closed behind them. Snowpack failure. I could not follow. I have been sending word through runners, but I have not had reply in 8 months. She said it carefully, the way she would say anything she had already decided she was going to say with full honesty. "They may have found new ground and simply not found a runner who could reach me, or they may have found something worse than a rock slide. You do not know which," he said. "No," she said. He looked at the mountain. "I am sorry," he said, and this time it was not a historical apology but a present one, for the specific weight she was carrying at this specific moment, and she received it differently. She looked at him sideways, and her expression did something undefended for a brief moment before she organized it back. "You apologize a great deal," she said. "When I mean it," he said, "not otherwise." She studied him for a long time, long enough that he looked away from the mountain and back at her, meeting those amber eyes in the firelight. The wind moved between them and carried the smoke from the bowl below, pine resin and cedar, and the cold had settled into something almost still. "What happened to you?" she asked. "That you know how to say things like that." "Nothing dramatic," he said. "My parents were farmholder people from the valley. My father died when I was 16. My mother remarried, and the new family needed the farm to go a different direction. I came to the wall because they needed bodies and I needed work. 5 years later, here I am," he shrugged. "Some people have interesting histories, some people have quiet ones. Quiet histories make for honest people," she said. "Usually." "Usually," he agreed. They were standing close, the way 2 people naturally stand when they have been awake for most of a night in the cold, sharing something dangerous and are now sharing something hot. Her shoulder was not quite touching his, but the air between them was negligible. "You are not afraid of me," she said, not accusing. "Observing, should I be?" he asked. "Most humans are," she said, "at least at first." "You have been nothing but useful and honest to me since we met," he said. "I am more afraid of the things in the ravine. They are more dangerous than I am," she said. "That is not the basis on which I assess fear," he said. Something moved in her expression again, and it was warmer than what had come before. She looked out at the mountain and he looked at her, and the night pressed close and cold and brilliant around them. At dawn, the ridge stalkers were gone. The fire in the bowl had lasted through the night, fed by 2 of the wall guards in careful rotations. And when the gray light of an early winter morning crept across the ravine wall, there was nothing there. No claw marks, no tracks in the snow, as if the creatures had simply declined to leave evidence. Ghorza examined the path below the bowl with the focused attention of an expert and then came back inside and told Thrake that the fire had held them but not permanently. "They will be back," she said, "and they will be hungrier next time. The temperature is going to drop significantly in the next 3 days. Every time the snowline drops, their prey moves lower and they follow it." Thrake had maps of her own spread on the garrison table. "What do we need?" You need to clear the eastern ravine, Ghorza said. There is a series of overhangs on the north face that create natural shelter for them during daylight. If those shelters are closed off, they cannot hold territory below the snow line and they will go back up. Close the overhangs, Thrake repeated. That is 300 feet of rock face. The monastery has charges, Gideon said. Both women looked at him. From when they were expanding the bell tower foundation 6 years ago, there is a store of quarrying charges in the monastery lower store. I inventoried them 3 years ago and they were still good. Thrake stared at him. You remember what you inventoried 3 years ago. I remember most things, he said, without particular pride. The charges are stacked against the east wall of the lower store in oiled canvas. The master of the store is Brother Callum. He has never thrown anything away in his life. They will still be there. Thrake was quiet for a moment. Then she said, How do we place them on a sheer rock face in winter? Everyone looked at Ghorza. Ghorza looked at the map. Then she looked at the ceiling for a moment in the way of someone calculating something complicated. Then she said, I need a rope, a harness if you have one, and whoever goes with me needs to not freeze at heights. I will go, Gideon said. You have been on the wall all night, Thrake said. Yes, he said, and I am the one who knows where the charges are and how the eastern rock face sits above the ravine. I have been looking at it for 5 years. He met Thrake's eyes. Send me. Thrake looked at him for a long moment with the expression of a person who is doing a rapid calculation of what they can afford to lose versus what they cannot afford not to try. Fine, she said. Get the charges, get some sleep first. Both of you, 4 hours, then go. Ghorza and Gideon were given a room above the broken tine, which was the closest thing the town had to an inn. A narrow space with 2 cots and a single window that looked out at the monastery wall, and they both lay down on opposite sides of the room with their coats on against the cold, and neither of them slept for at least an hour, which Gideon knew because he was listening to her breathing, and it had not slowed the way breathing slows in sleep. Ghorza, he said quietly. Yes, she said, which confirmed it. The map, he said, the sighting points you marked. You have been watching those things for 2 weeks. In the open, in the cold, alone. A pause. Yes, she said. That is remarkable, he said. Another pause, longer this time. Go to sleep, Shelby, she said, but there was something in it that was not dismissal. There was something that was very carefully pleased. He went to sleep. When he woke, she was already sitting up on her cot, relacing her bodice, and the winter light was coming gray and clean through the narrow window, and she looked in the pale morning cold like something that had always belonged to this mountain, to this sharp air and stone and sky, like the mountain had made her to match it. 4 hours exactly, she said, without looking up from her lacing. Your captain keeps good time. There was a knock at the door, and it was a garrison runner with the charges from Brother Callum's lower store, carefully wrapped, and a coil of good rope, and 2 sets of climbing pegs, and a note from Thrake that said only, Come back. They ate at the broken tine, a quick meal of porridge and hard cheese, sitting across from each other at the same table where she had pinned his wrist to the wood 12 hours ago, and Gideon thought about that again while he ate, her hand on his wrist, the way she had looked at it when she noticed, the quality of the pause before she let go. He did not say anything about it. There would be time, or there would not. The eastern road outside the wall was quiet and brilliant in the morning cold. The snow had a crust on it from the overnight freeze, and their boots broke through with each step, a clean crackling sound in the stillness. Above them, the ravine walls rose in stepped granite to the snowline, and above that the upper reaches of the mountain were lost in cloud. They roped together at the base of the ravine path, Ghorza leading because she knew what she was doing and Gideon was honest enough to acknowledge it, and then they began to climb. She moved on the rock with the easy confidence of someone who had been doing this since childhood, finding holds by feel and habit rather than by searching, moving steadily upward with the pack of charges on her back. Gideon was not a poor climber. 5 years on a mountain wall had given him arms and legs that could work, and he followed her line well. But he was watching her, and the watching was its own distraction. The way she moved, the flex and extension of her arms, the way she paused once to look up and assess, and the wind caught a loose strand of her dark hair, and she pressed it back behind her ear with the practical impatience of someone who does not have time for wind. "Stop watching me and watch the rock," she said without looking back. "I am watching the rock," he said. "You are watching me and the rock," she said. "Only watch the rock." He watched the rock. He was moderately successful. They reached the first overhang shelf at about 200 feet, a long horizontal shadow in the granite that created exactly the kind of sheltered ledge Ghorza had described, deep enough to block wind and the direct sun that would otherwise be lethal to something adapted to deep cave environments. It smelled up close of something animal and old, a cold, deep earth scent that made the hair on Gideon's arms stand up under his jacket. "They have been here," Ghorza said quietly, crouching on the shelf and touching the rock. Her expression was focused and remote, the face of a tracker reading a language that most people could not see. "Both of them, regularly. This is a primary shelter." She looked up. "2 charges here. Let the force drive upward into the shelf edge. The overhang will collapse inward." They placed the charges with methodical care, wedging them into the cracks she identified with an accuracy that suggested she had either done something very similar before or had thought about it so thoroughly that theory and practice had merged. She showed him how to angle each charge, and he followed her instruction without question, which she noted with a look that was brief but significant. "You trust my judgment," she said, "not a question." "You are the expert," he said. "I know which questions to ask and which people to believe when they answer." "Not a common quality," she said. "No," he agreed. They worked their way along the rock face, placing charges at each of the 4 major overhangs, moving in the cold and the silence of the high mountain with the valley dropping away below them, and the town of Ghorza tiny and close against the wall far beneath. At the 3rd shelf, Gideon's foot broke through a snow cornice that looked solid, and for one breathless second he had nothing under him, and then Ghorza's hand was around his forearm, gripping with the full force of an arm that was considerably stronger than his, and she held him suspended for the moment it took him to find rock again. He pressed back against the face and breathed. "Thank you," he said. She was still holding his arm. "Do not," she said tightly, "do that again." "I was not planning to do it the first time," he said. Her grip loosened, but she did not fully release his arm for another few seconds, and her eyes were on his face with an intensity that had nothing to do with technical assessment. She was checking him, not the way a person checks whether a tool is still usable, but the way a person checks whether something they have just realized matters to them is still whole. He saw it. He was careful not to make something of it in the moment, but he saw it. "I am fine," he said quietly. She let go. "Come on," she said. They placed the last charge and climbed back down to the ravine floor, and then they retreated down the path to the wall at a pace that suggested mutual agreement to not be in the blast radius when Ghorza signaled the charges with the trigger cord she unspooled behind her. From inside the closed gate, with the wall guards watching from the parapet above, she pulled the cord 4 times in the sequence she had determined, and the mountain above the ravine spoke. 4 cracks, not simultaneously but in quick succession, each one sharp and enormous in the mountain silence, and then the granite face of the ravine shed itself in a slow cascade of rock and snow and compressed air that was both tremendous, and from inside the wall strangely beautiful, the way large geological events are beautiful when they are happening exactly where you need them to happen. Dust and cold mist swept down into the ravine and rolled over the wall's edge in a pale wave. When it cleared, the overhangs were gone. Not entirely, there was still rock and shadow up there. Mountains do not become smooth simply because you ask them to, but the deep shelter ledges were gone, collapsed into the ravine as rubble, and the face above was open and exposed in a way it had not been before. Thrake watched from the wall walk with her arms folded. "Will it hold them?" she asked. Ghorza stood beside her. She studied the new face of the rock for a long time, reading it the way she read everything, with that careful, calibrated attention. "For this season," she said finally. "They will look for other approaches in spring, But they will not find shelter below the snowline now. They will go back up. Thrake nodded. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Gorehorn. Ghorza looked at her. The town owes you, Thrake said. Whether it knows it or not, my garrison knows it. She paused. You are welcome inside this wall as long as you wish to stay. Ghorza received this with a stillness that Gideon was beginning to recognize as the expression she wore when something affected her more than she intended to show. She did not say anything immediately. Then she said, Thank you, Captain. Thrake walked away to manage the aftermath. Gideon stood beside Ghorza on the wall walk with the cold morning bright around them and the ravine below full of new rubble and the particular ringing quiet that follows a large sound. She meant it, he said. I know, Ghorza said. That is what made it worth noting. He looked at her. There were dust streaks on her face from the blast, and her hair had come fully loose from the braid now, dark and heavy against her neck, and she was looking out at the mountain with those amber eyes that could hold light and now held the white winter sky, and she was alive and solid and present in a way that made him suddenly, acutely aware of the morning they had just survived. Ghorza, he said. She turned. I am glad you came to that tavern last night, he said. She looked at him for a long moment, the kind of look that does a great deal of unspoken work, measuring and finding and settling. I nearly did not, she said. I argued with myself for an hour outside the door, whether your people would listen, whether it was worth the effort. What decided it, he said. The courier was young, she said. I saw his face before I covered him with his cloak. He was young, and I thought, if I go in there and one person listens, that is one less young man dead. She paused. I did not expect the person who listened to be worth talking to beyond that. He felt something warm move through him that had nothing to do with the cold or the fire or the crisis that had just resolved. Is that a compliment? He asked. It is an accurate statement, she said. Make of it what you will. He held her gaze. Then I will make a great deal of it, he said. Something crossed her face that was close to a smile, contained and careful but real, and she turned back to look at the mountain. But she was standing a half-degree closer to him than she had been a moment ago, a small thing, barely measurable. But the mountain was cold, and the morning was sharp, and the half-degree mattered. The next 3 days were full of the practical work of a garrison town settling after a crisis. The fire bowls were maintained, the wall rotations doubled, the road below was cleared of debris from the blast, and Brother Callum from the monastery was in a considerable state about his inventory of charges, which Thrake resolved by having Gideon write him a formal account of their use, which Callum seemed to find satisfying in a way that the actual safety of the town had not. Ghorza stayed. She did not announce that she was staying, she simply did not leave. On the first morning after the blast, she appeared on the wall walk at dawn for the watch change, and Gideon was there, and they stood together for the first watch as naturally as if this were already a habit. On the second day, she spent several hours with the garrison trackers teaching them what she knew about ridge stalker sign, patient and precise, repeating things when asked, never condescending. She ate at the broken tine and she slept in the room above it, and she was in the town and of the town in a way that gradually, over those 3 days, became simply the way things were. There was some friction. There was always some friction. A drover named Wessex made a comment in the Broken Tine's common room on the second evening that Gideon shut down fast and hard, with a look that stopped Wessex mid-sentence, and a quiet word afterward that Gideon delivered privately, and that Wessex subsequently did not repeat. Ghorza, who had heard the comment, said nothing to Gideon about it, but when he returned from the quiet word with Wessex and sat back down across from her at the corner table, she studied him with those amber eyes for a long moment and then said quietly, "You did not have to do that." "I know," he said. "I wanted to." She was quiet. Then she said, "My clan says that a person who speaks for you when you are not in danger is worth more than one who speaks for you when you are. Because when you are in danger, everyone speaks. It is cheap. When you are safe, only the ones who mean it speak." "That is a very wise thing," he said. "My clan is very wise," she said, and then the light in her eyes changed because she had said my clan in the present tense and they both felt it. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers, and she looked down at his hand on her hand, and she did not move away. "They are your clan still," he said. "Distance does not change that." She turned her hand over under his slowly until they were palm to palm. "No," she said very quietly, "it does not." He did not push it. He sat with her hand in his and let the fire in the hearth do the talking for a while. And the wind moved outside the tavern walls, and the mountain held its cold silence above the town. And they sat together in the corner of the broken tine, in the particular, specific peace of two people who have found each other in a landscape where finding anything at all is not guaranteed. On the fourth day, Thrake called Gideon into the garrison office and told him that a courier had come from the valley garrison at Eden Ford, and that Eden Ford was reporting a party of orc travelers stranded on the western highroad in the early blizzard that had come down from the north 2 days past. The party had taken shelter in a damaged way station, but the way station was inadequate for the conditions, and the valley garrison did not have the mountain experience or the winter provisions to send a rescue into the high pass. "How many in the party?" Gideon asked. 11, Thrake said. The courier was not certain of the composition. He said the leader sent word in Orcish script, and it was translated roughly as, "We are of the Gorehorn clan, stranded at the second way station on the western highroad. Our winter route has closed and we cannot return east. We need winter passage." Gideon was out of the office and across the garrison yard in 30 seconds. He found Ghorza on the eastern wall walk, which was where she went when she was thinking, and he came up the stone steps 2 at a time, and she turned when she heard him coming fast, already putting her hand to her knife on instinct, and then dropping it when she saw his face. "What?" she said. "Gorehorn clan," he said. 11 people. Stranded at the second way station on the western highroad. A blizzard pinned them 2 days ago. She was very still for a moment. Very, very still in the way that she went still when something moved through her that she did not want to express at full volume. "The western highroad second way station is 2 days' walk from here in summer conditions," she said. "In this weather, it would be 3 days," he said. "Maybe 4 if the blizzard is still pushing." "They have been in that way station for 2 days already," she said. "The west side way station is a timber lean-to, not a full structure. It does not have a proper hearth, only a fire ring. In this temperature, I know," he said. "We need to go." She looked at him. I know this mountain's western face," he said. "I have been doing winter rescue rotations on the high passes for 3 years. I know the way station sites and the trail conditions and which paths are avalanche risk and which are not." He met her eyes. "And you know your clan. You know how to move them, how to communicate with them, how to keep 11 people together in a whiteout when panic is the thing most likely to kill them." "Thrake will not send her garrison into the high passes in a blizzard," Ghorza said. "Thrake is sending me," Gideon said, "with 2 volunteers. I already have Aldrich and a guard named Pedia who knows the western face. And you, if you will come." She held his gaze. "My clan does not trust humans," she said. "They trust you," he said. "That is enough." She was quiet for 10 seconds, and in those 10 seconds he could see her doing the kind of calculation that people do when the stakes are people they love and the math is dangerous. Then she pushed off the parapet and said, "Get the winter packs, full provisions. The good ropes, not the wall ropes, the climbing ropes from the garrison stores. And something hot in a sealed flask, because it will be cold enough up there that your words will freeze before they reach me. I will have everything ready in an hour," he said. She started walking toward the stairs. 40 minutes, she said over her shoulder. He said, 40 minutes, and when I make it happen. They left through the western gate at midday, 4 of them, Gideon and Ghorza and Aldrich and Pedia, with winter packs and the good climbing ropes and sealed flasks of hot broth and enough provisions for 4 days going and 4 days coming, because you always planned for longer than you expected. The western road was broad enough for a wagon in summer and barely a path in the current conditions. the snow packed deep and the wind off the upper mountain constant and considered. Ghorza led at first, setting a pace that was fast enough to cover ground but sustainable, and Gideon fell in behind her and Aldrich and Petia came after. Aldrich, in the first hour of walking, came up beside Ghorza and said, without preamble, "I was rude to you at the tavern." Ghorza looked at him. "Yes," she said. "I am not rude to people who are useful," Aldrich said. "That is my standard. You are the most useful person in this town at this moment." "That is a low bar for an apology," she said. Aldrich made the sound again, the one that was possibly the beginning of respect. "Fair enough," he said, and fell back. Gideon, who had heard all of this, said nothing, but felt something warm toward Aldrich that he had not expected. The first day of the trek was hard in the honest way that mountain winter travel is hard, physically demanding and requiring constant attention, but not yet dangerous. The blizzard that had trapped Ghorza's clan had come from the north and was sitting over the high passes above them, visible as a moving wall of gray-white that ate the sky in the northwest. They made camp that night in a cliff shelter that Gideon knew from 3 years of winter rotations, a natural overhang deep enough to block wind on 3 sides, and built a fire that they fed carefully through the night in rotation. Ghorza took the third watch alone, which was the coldest, and when Gideon woke for his dawn rotation, she was sitting cross-legged by the fire with her hands wrapped around a cup, looking into the flames with an expression he had not seen on her before, something open and unguarded that the night had allowed through. He sat beside her. "How far to the way station from here?" he asked, keeping his voice low so as not to wake the others. "Half a day in these conditions," she said. "Maybe less if the wind drops." "Will they be all right?" he asked. He did not ask it gently, not as a comfort, but as a genuine question because she was the one who knew. She was quiet for a moment. "My clan is hardy," she said. "My clan has survived worse than a blizzard in a lean-to, but 11 people sharing one fire ring in this temperature for this many days. Some of them will be cold in ways that take time to recover from." "We will get to them," he said. She looked at him. In the firelight, with the night pressing close and the mountain enormous and indifferent above them and her clan somewhere in the white distance of the upper passes, she looked at him with those amber eyes and she said, "Do you always believe things will work out?" "No," he said, "but I believe that if I do the work the odds improve. That is as much certainty as I know how to carry." "That is honest," she said. "I try to be," he said. She was close to him, the fire between them and the cliff wall at their back, and the night was cold enough that their breath made small clouds in the air between them. She turned her cup in her hands and he watched her fingers and she caught him watching, and this time she did not look away. "You were watching me climb the rock face," she said. "Yes," he said. "And now you are watching my hands," she said. "Yes," he said. "Stop being obvious about it," she said, but her voice was low and there was something in it that was not reproach. "I could try," he said. "I am not sure I would succeed." She looked at him for a long time in the firelight. Then she reached out slowly and pressed her palm flat against his chest, over the center of his sternum, feeling his heartbeat. He was very still. Her eyes were on her hand and then they moved to his face, and the amber light in them was warm and serious and entirely present. "You have a loud heartbeat," she said. "You have an interesting effect on it," he said. Her hand curved slightly, fingers pressing in, and she was close enough that he could see the detail of her face clearly, the fine, clean lines of her jaw, the way the firelight caught the edge of her lower tusk, the dark wave of her unbound hair against her shoulder, and all of that was remarkable and beautiful in a way that was specifically and thoroughly her. Not a category or a type or a thing to be processed, but her, Ghorza, who had come to a tavern to warn strangers and had stayed because the work required it, and was now pressing her hand flat over his heart in the middle of a mountain night, because something between them had reached a point where that was what came next. He raised his hand and covered hers, holding it against his chest. She held very still. "Ghorza," he said. "Don't make it complicated," she said softly. "Not yet." "All right," he said. They sat together with her hand over his heart and his hand over hers, and the fire pushing back the mountain dark and the night turning slowly toward morning. Neither of them spoke again. Neither of them needed to. The second day began before full light. Aldrich and Pettia moving efficiently with the practiced ease of experienced winter garrison hands, and they were on the path before the sun cleared the eastern peaks. The weather was better than it had been, the blizzard still present in the upper passes but no longer pushing down to their elevation, and the wind had dropped to something manageable. They reached the second way station on the western highroad at midday. It was a timber lean-to, exactly as Ghorza had described, 3 walls and a partial roof, built against a granite outcrop that served as the 4th wall, and it was full of people. 11 people, as the courier had reported, most of them huddled in the center around a fire ring that was burning low, dressed in the heavy furs and leathers of a clan that had been prepared for mountain travel, but not for an extended unplanned stay. They were cold, clearly, and tired, and several of the older ones had the careful stillness of people managing something difficult, but they were all present and all conscious. And when Ghorza came through the entrance gap in the front wall, they all turned, and for a single moment there was a complete, absolute silence. Then an older orc woman, broad and gray-browed, with the bearing of someone who had been in charge of difficult situations for a very long time, stood up and said something in Orcish with a tone that crossed every language barrier because it was simply relief, the sound relief makes when it is real. Ghorza crossed the shelter in 3 steps and embraced the older woman, and Gideon stood at the entrance and watched the two of them, and he felt something in his chest settle that he had not known was unsettled. He had provisions in his pack. He started distributing them without ceremony, and Aldrich and Pettia did the same, and in 20 minutes there was hot broth going, and the firing was burning stronger, and 11 people who had been sitting in the cold for 2 days were warming their hands and eating, and the shelter was full of sound again. The older orc woman, whose name was Keth and who was, Ghorza explained quietly, the clan's senior pathfinder, looked at Gideon with the particular measuring scrutiny that elders use when they are deciding what to do with an unexpected thing. "You brought wall men," Keth said in careful but functional common tongue, "to find us." "I brought the best people I could find," Ghorza said. "On this mountain in winter, that is what they are." Keth looked at Gideon for a long time. Then she looked at the way Ghorza was standing, which was beside him, and the way Ghorza's shoulder was against his arm, and she did something with her expression that was small and complete. "The pathfinder of the Gorehorn has always had good judgment," Keth said, finally, and turned back to the broth. Ghorza did not look at Gideon, but she pressed her shoulder a fraction more firmly against his arm, and he thought that was probably the most public statement she was inclined to make at this particular moment, and it was enough. They stayed the night at the way station with the full party, building the fire up properly and setting a watch rotation with the clan's own guards, who were fit enough, and in the morning they began the return to Kithra's wall. 11 additional people is a different kind of movement than 4. The pace was slower and required constant attention to the group's progress, watching for the signs that someone was flagging or too cold to sustain the pace, making adjustments. Ghorza moved up and down the group constantly, checking, encouraging, giving specific direction, and Gideon watched her work and thought about what it meant to know how to take care of people, how some people learn that skill because they have to, and some because they want to, and some because it is simply the language their heart speaks. She came back to walk beside him in the middle of the afternoon when the group was moving well and the wind had dropped again, and she was breathing hard from the pace she had been setting along the column, and she fell in beside him and matched his stride without comment. "They are going to need a place to winter over," she said. "Kithra is the nearest settlement with adequate shelter. Thrake will accommodate them," he said. She looked at him. "You are sure of that?" "I will make sure of it," he said. "If it needs making sure." She was quiet for a moment. "You keep doing that," she said. "Doing what?" he asked. "Making things happen that need to happen," she said, "without being asked." without making it a negotiation. "Someone has to," he said. "No," she said. "Someone often does not. You choose to." She paused. "I have been watching you since we came out of that tavern, and you have not stopped choosing to." He looked at her. "I have good reason," he said. She held his gaze for a 3 count in the cold mountain wind, and then she looked back at the path and said nothing more. But her hand found his in the space between them, and her fingers closed over his, and they walked the rest of that afternoon like that, hand in hand on the mountain in the winter cold, leading a group of 11 people home. Ghorza's wall came into view in the late afternoon of the third day, the gray stone of it enormous and solid against the mountain face, with the torches already lit on the towers and a thin thread of smoke rising from every chimney in the town. Gideon felt the particular relief of a landmark that means safety, and he watched the same thing move through the 11 members of Ghorza's clan as they came out of the high pass and saw the wall below them. Thrake was at the gate when they arrived. She took in the group with one sweep of her eyes and said, "Shelby, report." 11 people, all ambulatory, some cold stress in the elders, nothing that food and warmth won't resolve, he said. They need accommodation for the winter. The highroads east and west are closed. Thrake looked at the clan. She looked at Keth, who looked back at her with the same measuring quality that Keth applied to everything. Then Thrake said, "The monastery has guest quarters on the south wing. They are large and warm. Brother Callum will complain, but he will not be able to stop me. Come inside." She turned and walked back through the gate. The clan followed her. Aldrich and Petia went with them, already talking to the clan's guards in the easy way of soldiers who have spent a night around the same fire. Gideon and Ghorza were the last ones through the gate. She stopped just inside the wall, where the torchlight fell warm and golden on the cobblestones, and turned to look back out through the gate at the mountain. He stood beside her and looked with her, the two of them framing the gate opening with the mountain beyond it, the high passes still catching the last light and the snowfields blazing orange-pink in the sunset. "Your clan is safe," he said. "Yes," she said. "Your clan is safe," he said again, differently, as if saying it a second time was offering her permission to let the weight of it land. She turned to look at him, and her expression was unguarded in a way he had only glimpsed before, in the middle of the mountain night by the fire, her hand over his heart. It was unguarded and full, and there was a brightness in those amber eyes that was not entirely from the torchlight. "I have been looking for them for 8 months, she said. "I did not know if. I did not let myself think too directly about what I did not know." "I know," he said. "And then I walked into that tavern and pinned a wall guard's wrist to a table," she said, and something in her voice was lighter now, threading through the emotion. "And he turned out to be," she stopped. "He turned out to be what?" Gideon said. She looked at him steadily. "He turned out to be someone worth staying for," she said. He closed the distance between them, and she watched him come, and when he put his hand against her jaw, her eyes closed for half a second and then opened, and she was looking at him from very close, and her expression was everything she had been careful and precise and contained about for the last 5 days, offered plainly and without reservation. He kissed her. She made a sound against his mouth that was surprise and satisfaction, and something deeper than either, and she kissed him back with the direct, unshy force of a woman who knows what she wants and has decided to have it. And her hands came up and held his face, and the mountain wind moved around them, and the torchlight moved, and the gate of Ghorza's wall framed them against the burning mountain sky. And it was complete and real, and it was the thing that had been building since she had slammed his wrist to a table and then sat across from him and been honest about everything. He pulled back first, just far enough to see her face. Her eyes were bright. Her expression was open. She looked like herself, fully and without any of the careful management she applied to the world, and she was remarkable. "You have good timing," she said. "I have been waiting for the right moment since the first night," he said. "You could have not waited," she said. "You were armed," he said. She almost laughed. It was not quite a laugh, but it was close, a warm exhalation that lit up the corners of her eyes, and he thought he would spend a considerable amount of the rest of his life trying to produce exactly that. "Come on," she said. "We should eat something that is not trail rations and sleep somewhere that is not a mountain overhang." "Yes," he said, "we should." They walked across the cobblestones of Keithra's wall together toward the warm lights of the broken tine. The following weeks settled into a kind of life that Gideon had not planned for, and found he wanted with a completeness that surprised him. The Gorehorn clan occupied the monastery's south wing, which was warmer than it had been in years because Brother Callum turned out to hold no personal grievances against the orc people. Once their elder healer helped his arthritic hands with a treatment that the monastery's own physicians had not known, and the relationship between clan and monastery grew into something useful and mutually respectful, without anyone having to make speeches about it. Keth, who had assessed Gideon with precision on the day of the rescue and filed her conclusion, treated him with the careful respect that a senior pathfinder extends to someone who has demonstrated worth through action rather than simply through claim. She taught him, over several shared evening meals, some basic phrases in Orcish, and when he used them carefully and correctly, she nodded with the satisfaction of a teacher whose instinct about a student has proved accurate. Ghorza and Gideon found the form of their days together naturally, the way two people who share an aptitude for directness tend to do. She worked with the garrison's tracker team through the winter, building their capacity in the high passes, and he ran his wall rotations and did the administrative work that Thrake had been quietly adding to his responsibilities since the Ridge Stalker crisis. They ate together most evenings at the Broken Tine and walked the wall walk in the evenings, and the town of Keithra arranged itself around their presence as a unit in the way towns do when something has been established through demonstrated necessity rather than through debate. There were moments, as there are always moments in human and orc relations on a border mountain town, when someone said something or made a face or positioned themselves in a doorway in a way that required a response. Gideon made those responses consistently and calmly, and Ghorza, who had learned to read him well, always knew when he had made one because he would come back from wherever it had happened with a particular quality of quietness that was not anger but was adjacent to it, and she would say nothing until he was ready to talk, and when he was ready, she would listen with the careful attention she gave to everything worth tracking. One evening she said, watching him over the dinner table after he had come back from a conversation with the Eastern Gate traders, "You are angry." "I am managed," he said. "That is not the same thing," she said. "No," he agreed. He was quiet for a moment. A man suggested that the orc presence in the monastery was affecting property values in the trading quarter. "What did you say?" she asked. "I said that the orc presence in the monastery had saved every life in this town, including his own," he said. "And then I said that if he had a formal complaint he could bring it to Captain Thrake, who would be happy to hear it." "Did he go to Thrake?" she asked. "He went home," Gideon said. Ghorza was quiet. Then she said, "Gideon," he looked at her. "I have been unwelcome in many places," she said. "I know what it costs a person to be the one who speaks when the easy thing is to be quiet. I know what it costs each time." She reached across the table and put her hand over his, and this time there was nothing tentative about it. It was firm and direct and entirely her. "You are spending something on my behalf that does not come back. I want you to know I see it." He turned his hand over and held hers. "It comes back," he said. "Every time I look at you, it comes back entirely." She held his gaze for a long time with those amber eyes, and then she stood up from her side of the table and came around and sat beside him on the bench, which was not something she had done before in a public room, and she put her head against the side of his, and they sat like that in the Broken Tine corner while the fire burned low and the mountain winter pressed cold and clean against the timber walls. And he felt the weight of her beside him, and it was the most specific and grounded happiness he had ever known. In the deep weeks of winter, when the high passes were fully closed and the town settled into the long patience of mountain cold, Keth called Ghorza to a clan gathering in the monastery's south wing common room, and Gideon was present because Ghorza had asked him to come and Keth had not objected. The clan gathering was a formal thing, not elaborate but deliberate. The 11 members of the Gorehorn clan in a seated circle with Keth at the senior position, and it concerned the question of what came next. The eastern route remained closed for the winter. The western highroad would be passable in early spring. The clan needed to decide whether to push back to traditional territory or to look for a new ground. There was discussion in Orcish that Gideon could not follow completely, though he caught some of the words Keth had taught him, enough to understand the shape of it. Then Keth spoke in common tongue, looking at him directly. Pathfinder Ghorza has indicated she does not intend to return to the upper reaches immediately, Keth said. She has indicated she has reason to remain at this elevation. I am asking you whether you consider yourself that reason. Gideon said, yes, without hesitation. Keth studied him. Orc bonds are not light things, she said. A Gorehorn does not give a bond lightly, and we do not take lightly the person to whom it is given. You understand this means she has claimed you and you are acknowledging the claim. I understand that, he said, and she should know that the claim is mutual. Keth looked at Ghorza. Something passed between them in a glance that was short and complete. Then Keth said in Orcish, something that produced a reaction in the clan that was not quite approval but was its structural equivalent, a general settling of the room toward a decision that had already been made. Then the clan acknowledges the bond, Keth said, back in common tongue, and wishes you both good path. Ghorza was beside him on the bench, and her hand found his under the table, and she pressed it with a grip that was strong and warm and entirely certain. Later, walking back through the monastery's stone corridor toward the gate and the town beyond, she said without looking at him, "You answered very quickly." "It was an easy question," he said. "It was not a small question," she said. "No," he said, "but easy and small are not the same thing." He stopped walking and she stopped with him in the torchlit corridor, the old stone around them and the wind outside and the clan's warmth behind them. He turned to face her. "I have been on this mountain for 5 years," he said. 5 years of walls and rotations and inventories and watching other people pass through on their way to somewhere else. And then you walked into a tavern and put your hand on my wrist, and you were honest and direct and remarkable, and you stayed. And I have not for a single day wanted you to leave. That is not complicated. That is just true. She looked at him for a long time in the torchlight. Her expression was the open one, the unguarded one, and there was something in it that was fierce and tender at the same time in a way that he had begun to understand was specifically how she felt things, at full force, contained in discipline, but entirely real. "Say it again," she said. "I do not want you to leave," he said. She stepped forward and kissed him, and it was not like the first kiss, which had been immediate and revelatory. This one was slower and deeper, her hands at his jaw and his hands at her waist, and it was the kiss of two people who have already established something and are now building on the foundation. And the corridor was cold and the stone was old and the mountain outside was enormous and indifferent, and none of that mattered at all. They pulled back and stood close, and she pressed her forehead briefly to his, an orc gesture she had explained to him once, used between people who share a path, and he understood it and leaned into it and felt the warmth of it. "Good path," she said quietly. "Good path," he said. As winter pressed its deepest into the mountain and the weeks grew long and close, their life together took on a shape that felt permanent in the way of things that have been decided rather than merely desired. She was there in the mornings when he came off the late watch, sitting by the hearth in the room above the broken tine with a cup in her hands and her hair loose. And he was there in the afternoons when she came back from working with the garrison trackers. And the evenings they built together out of shared meals and long conversations, and the particular ease of two people who have discovered that the other one is interesting. She told him about growing up in the upper reaches, the deep cold and the blue ice, and the way the mountain looked different from above the tree line, like the bones of the world showing through. She told him about her mother, who had been the clan's senior healer, and about learning tracking from her Aunt Keth, and about the rock slide that had changed the winter path and separated her from her clan, and how the 8 months of not knowing had been the hardest thing she had ever done, not the cold or the danger or the solitude, but the not knowing. He told her about his father's farm, the smell of turned earth in spring, and the way the light fell different in the valley than on the mountain, and about coming to the wall at 19 with one change of clothes and a knife, and the understanding that he had to make himself useful to the world, or he would have nothing to stand on. He told her about the 5 years of learning Thrake's way of doing things, which was demanding and consistent, and had made him a better person than he might have otherwise been, and about the loneliness of being good at something in a place where the work was mostly small and the recognition was mostly absent. "You did not seem lonely," she said. "I did not perform it," he said. "It was not a dramatic loneliness. It was just the quiet kind, where you are comfortable in your days and good at your work, and it is still somehow not enough because no one knows the version of you that exists inside all of that." She looked at him. "I know that version," she said. "I know you do," he said. "That is the thing." She moved to where he was sitting by the hearth and settled beside him with the unself-conscious directness that was entirely her shoulder against his, her hand finding his on the armrest. "In Orcish," she said, "there is a word, Kurha, that describes the person who makes you legible to yourself. Not who explains you to others, but who makes you clear to you, because they see you so completely that the seeing does the work." She paused. "We say a person has found their Kurha when they describe a feeling like this." "And have you?" he asked. She turned to look at him, amber eyes steady and warm in the firelight. "What do you think?" she said. "I think yes," he said. "Yes," she confirmed. And she put her head on his shoulder, and he pressed his cheek to the top of her head, and the fire burned and the mountain kept its cold outside, and inside the room the warmth was complete and earned and real. Spring came to Kithra's wall the way it always came to that mountain, slowly and then all at once, with snowmelt cutting bright channels in the cobblestones, and the passes beginning to clear from the bottom up and the first traders from the valley arriving in the 4th week of the 2nd month with supplies and news, and the general sense that the world below had not stopped turning while the mountain town sat through its winter. With spring came the question. The western highroad was clear by the 5th week. The eastern route, as reported by the first scouts out of the valley garrison, was clear to its 2nd junction, and beyond that junction lay the direction of the traditional Gorehorn territory. Keth convened the clan in the monastery south wing and announced the assessment. The path east was viable, and the clan's direction of travel was east to re-establish their territory in the upper reaches. Ghorza came to Gideon that evening with the particular directness she used when something needed to be said clearly and without prevarication. "My clan is leaving in 3 days," she said, "going east and north, back to the upper reaches." He had known this was coming. He had been letting himself know it for weeks. "Are you going with them?" he asked. She looked at him steadily. "That depends," she said. "On what?" he asked. "On whether you are coming," she said. He was very still for a moment. "With the clan," he said. "No," she said. "Not with the clan, with me. I am not going with the clan." She paused, and her expression was direct and clear, no ambiguity in it. "I am a pathfinder. My work is the passes, the routes, the mountain. I do not need a clan territory to do that work. Keth knows this. We talked this morning." She paused again. "The question is whether you want to come with me when I go, or whether you want to stay." He thought about the wall. He thought about Thrake, who had known something was shifting in him and had been giving him more responsibility rather than less, and about Aldrich, who had 17 years in this garrison and would have 17 more. He thought about the 5 years of rotations and inventories and small, steady, useful work in a place where passing through was what most people did. He thought about Ghorza. "Where are you going?" he asked. "East first," she said, "to see the clan through the pass safely. Then south to the valley junction, and then wherever the next thing is. There are passes all along this range that no one maps properly." There are garrison towns smaller than this one that have no winter rescue capacity. There are places that need what I know how to do." She looked at him. "And everything I know about working with garrison wall people I know because of you. I know how to bring both together now, orc pathfinding and wall garrison thinking. That is worth something on a mountain range." "You are asking me to leave the garrison," he said. "I am asking if you want to," she said. "If you do not, I will find another way. I am not giving you an ultimatum. I am giving you a choice." He stood up and walked to the window and looked out at the mountain, which was showing its spring face, brown rock and white snow and the enormous sky above the passes. And he thought about every morning he had stood on the wall walk watching that same mountain and thinking about what it contained, and never going into it except on rotations. Then he turned back and looked at her. "I have been on this wall for 5 years," he said. "I am a corporal with stitched-on stripes because the quartermaster ran out of the official patches. I know this town and I know this wall, and I am good at both, and neither one of them sees me clearly." He paused. "You do?" "Yes," she said simply. "Then there is no real question," he said. He went to Thrake in the morning, and Thrake listened to him without interruption, and when he was finished she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I have been wondering when you were going to say this." "Captain," he said. "Shelby," she said. "I have been running this garrison for 14 years. In that time I have had 3 people who were genuinely worth keeping. You are one of them. And every person who is genuinely worth keeping needs to eventually find the thing that is worth more than the safe work." She looked at him. "She is worth more than the safe work." "Yes," he said. "The garrison will be here," Thrake said. "If you come back through, and if you need anything we have, we will give it." She stood and extended her hand. He shook it. "Go," she said, "and do something worth coming back to tell me about." He went. He had little to pack. A mountain guard's possessions are practical rather than numerous. Good boots, a climbing pack, tools, weapons, the oiled canvas journal he had kept for years out of the habit of recording things accurately. He packed everything he owned into the same pack he had carried up the eastern ravine face a season ago. And when he came down to the broken Tyne courtyard in the early morning with the pack on his back, Ghorza was there. She was standing in the courtyard with her own pack and her hunting knife at her hip and the riding cloak over one shoulder, and the morning light was the clean yellow light of a mountain spring morning, and she looked at him when he came down the stairs, and she was already ready, which was the most Ghorza thing he could imagine. Keth was there to see them off, along with most of the clan. The farewell was brief and physical, the kind that people who have work to do give each other. And Keth gripped Ghorza's forearm and said something low and orcish that made Ghorza close her eyes briefly and then open them steadier. Then Keth looked at Gideon and gripped his forearm in the same way and said, in common tongue, "Take care of each other." "We will," he said. Aldrich was there, leaning against the gate post with his arms folded, and when Gideon passed him he said, "You are going to do something stupid and heroic, and you are going to be fine," which was Aldrich's version of a blessing, and Gideon accepted it in the spirit offered. They walked out through the western gate together, packs on their backs and the mountain road opening ahead of them and the wall of Kithra solid and gray behind them, and the morning was clear, and the passes were bright with snowmelt, and the world was enormous and open in every direction. They walked for a while in the good, companionable silence of 2 people who do not need to fill space. The clan's path and their path diverged at the first junction, east and north for the Gorehorn, east and south for Gideon and Ghorza, and they watched the clan column move away through the pass until they were small and then gone, and then they stood at the junction alone. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "No," he said. "Are you?" She thought about it. "Of the wrong things," she said. "Not of the mountain or the work or the uncertainty, she paused, of reaching for something real and finding I have misjudged it." He looked at her. "You have not misjudged it," he said. "I am exactly what I appear to be, nothing more complicated." "That is not a limitation," she said. "That is the thing." He reached out and took her hand, and she took his. And they stood at the junction of 2 paths in the morning light, with the mountain bright around them. She was warm and solid beside him, her hand strong in his, and ahead of them the road ran out toward new passes and new towns and work that mattered and a life that was going to be theirs in the full and specific sense. "Ghorza," he said. "Yes," she said. "I want you to know something," he said. "Before we go further, I want you to know that every choice I have made since you walked into that tavern and put your hand on my wrist has been the clearest choice I have ever made. I do not need time or certainty beyond what I already have. I know what this is." She turned to look at him with those amber eyes and everything that was in them, the fierce intelligence and the careful heart, and the warmth that she reserved for the small number of things she had decided were worth her full attention. She was worth 100 versions of the word remarkable, and every single one of them was accurate. "Say it," she said. The way she said it was simple and direct and carried no shyness, because she did not do things by half and she did not want what was in him to be half given. "I love you," he said. She was quiet for a moment that was neither hesitation nor uncertainty, but the particular breath that comes before something is spoken for the first time and confirmed rather than discovered. "Kurha," she said softly, and then in common tongue slowly, as if translating a word that had never fully existed there before. "I love you." The morning held them there for a moment, the junction behind them and the open road ahead, and the mountain enormous and patient and magnificent in the spring light. Then they walked forward. They had a map, her map, drawn in the careful ink that had started all of this, and it showed the passes south and east, and the towns along the mountain range that needed the things they knew how to do, and the road was long and the mountain was real, and the work would be hard and honest and worth doing. They walked into the open morning hand in hand, the wall of Kithra a gray shape behind them growing smaller with distance, the mountain range ahead of them broad and bright and promising, and they were together on the road, walking free into a new life with the danger behind them and the whole of the mountain world ahead. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.